As a part of a program to better insulate the buildings and reduce energy costs. So these many buildings in New York City and elsewhere in the country didn't have thermopane windows. They had windows that had been there for 40 years that let a whole lot of heat out and a whole lot of cold in.
It didn't take the LCN very long to figure out an angle, and the angle was to have selective installers bid rig, get the bid, and then assess them a price of $2 per window for labor piece. If you multiplied the number of housing developments by the number of windows in place that have been replaced, you can see the significance of this windows case.
While Vic Amuso and Tony Casso waited for profits to pour in from the window racket, the law began to catch up with them. A murder investigation led authorities to victims buried under Peter Savino's factory.
Upon digging up those bodies, as we were standing there watching this evidence come to us, we realized that we had what we needed to roll and to confront and roll yet another very influential and knowledgeable person in Genevieve's family, and that was Peter Savino. And he ran around for 18 months, wired up in a secret undercover investigation against numerous members and captains and underboss and consiglieres of various crime families, until finally we pulled the plug.
The windows case was successfully prosecuted through a cooperating witness, Peter Savino. He had the inside knowledge, if you will, of the machinations that occurred that allowed this case to proceed. How the bids were rigged, how the payments were extorted and distributed.
When we indicted the windows case, Vic Amuso and Anthony Gaspipe Casso, who were then the boss and underboss, the two highest ranking members of the Lucchese crime family, fled. And while they were on the lam, they began a series of contracts on their own leadership, which we later prosecuted Vic Amuso for and Gaspipe Casso. They knocked off captains who they thought might be treacherous. They labeled them as rats and ordered their own soldiers to kill their own. And it happened half a dozen times.
The murderous actions of Gaspipe Casso led authorities to believe he was either insane or just plain stupid.
Stupid to a degree that is almost breathtaking. It is almost inconceivable that in an organization originally founded by a guy who was so low-key, you would never guess this man was a mafia leader, to be replaced ultimately by a psychopath.
Amuso and Casso became increasingly paranoid. They even turned on their own chief executioner, Peter Chiodo, when he failed to carry out a hit. After an attempt was made on his life, Chiodo flipped and became a witness. So did acting underboss, Little Al Diarco. In 1993, Diarco walked into the FBI's office in White Plains, New York, after being falsely labeled a rat. It was an event law enforcement was waiting for in their ongoing war against one of the world's most successful criminal dynasties ever.
This is it. Let's hear it.
Okay. I'm going to tell you what I know, and I'm going to tell you how I know it.
For the Lucchese family, the curtain was closing. Prosecutors were able once again to strip away the top layers of the family leadership.
Vic Amuso is still the boss of the Lucchese crime family. And that's what I think the government's view of the situation, based on the evidence, their current understanding, is that he hasn't relinquished control, but he could.
Former FBI agent Bonavolanta believes the Lucchese family is in serious trouble.
The new leaders, the leaders of today, the second and third team, as I've always called them, they're tied not by honor, respect, and family. They're tied by the economy. They're tied by money. They're tied by greed. And greed and money, those ties are much easier to break than honor, respect, and family. So what we're finding is a much less competent mafia leader today, La Cosa Nostra leader today, than we had in the 70s and 80s.
You know, you ever see those charts? You know, the original Neanderthal or the Lucy, wherever it is, the earliest man, that kind of, they look sort of ape-like. But as the time goes on, they get smarter, their brain cases get bigger, and now they're erect Homo sapiens in business suits. It's the opposite way here. Turn it around. We start from criminal genius over here to caveman on this side. There's a reverse descent going on.
One of the most distinguishing, albeit regrettable, characteristics of the 20th century in America has been the proliferation of organized crime. From the Tommy gun-wielding gangsters of the Roaring Twenties to the all-powerful dons of the Godfather era, to the silent and insidious control the Mafia had over everyday life in the 60s and 70s. In just the last decade and a half, though, law enforcement has finally been able to make some real headway in their ongoing battle. Though Thomas Dewey promised to rid the country of the mob, and Robert Kennedy made the same promise decades later, it has only been in recent years that new laws and new approaches to fighting organized crime have started to pay off. Federal, state, and local police have finally figured out how to work together effectively. Legislators have at last given prosecutors laws with teeth. The once powerful dynasty that was the Lucchese family has also been affected by cultural changes since the early 1900s. Old world traditions transplanted in the land of opportunity provided just the fertile conditions needed to produce such criminal masterminds as Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, and Gaetano Lucchese. Later replacements for the founders of the National Crime Syndicate seem to have taken a Darwinian step backward.
You know, the leaders all went to jail for 100 years. They were replaced by people who were somewhat less experienced, somewhat less tested. And then in all the subsequent cases that were made, that group of leaders was taken out and sent to jail. And what we have now is a leadership of the mob that is, I think, really only a shadow of what it was 10 years ago. They're less experienced, they're less sophisticated, they're less skillful at organizing, and really they're more glorified street thugs than the kind of sophisticated organized crime businessmen you had in the early and mid-'80s. And the turnover has become more rapid and they haven't matured as leaders. But also, when the mob realized that the government was effectively targeting bosses, all of a sudden some of the brightest people in the mob didn't want to be bosses anymore. And you started to hear that they were having difficulty, you know, finding the top captains to take the promotions. The big earners, the really shrewd criminal operators wanted to keep a lower profile. They didn't want to be promoted. And I think that has had a long-term impact on the effectiveness of the mob.
Ethnic succession has also worn away at Mafia families such as the Luccheses, for so long dominated by Sicilians. New arrivals, new minorities have tried to pick up the slack and fill criminal niches left vacant by the old mob.
If people think the battle is over, if they walk away from the constant need to fight organized crime, then in 10 years or 20 years, organized crime will come back.
Though many have proclaimed the death of the old mob, especially the dynasty once ruled by Tommy Lucchese, law enforcement officers caution that the Mafia is down but not out. They remind us of the amazing power of criminal enterprises to regenerate. And while the Lucchese and other crime families may never regain the power of decades past, they continue to operate in the shadows. They are constantly devising new rackets and new ways to elude prosecution. Perhaps a final chapter will unfold as law enforcement further refines its efforts to stay one step ahead of the wise guys. I'm Robert Stack. Thanks for joining.